Okay, we've got the bulk of everybody in, and it is 8 o'clock. So let's kick this thing off. Um, Hello, everybody. We are so happy you're here for tonight's webinar. This has been an exciting topic that we have been very excited to bring to everyone. We've been talking to Cathy about it for quite some time, so we're very excited that tonight's finally the night. So tonight's presenter, of course, is Cathy Hasprunar. Cathy has her Master's of Science in Speech Language Pathology and has traveled this road both as a school-based SLP and also as a parent navigating on behalf of her own children with special needs. This combination of personal and professional experience is exactly what makes her insights into progress monitoring hugely relevant and impactful. If you have questions as we go, please drop them into the chat. That seems to be working very well. We'll do our very best to get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. The disclaimer we typically read is now included in the email with the Zoom link, so we won't need to run through that tonight, and we can instead move into what we are all here to learn. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Cathy to share a little bit more about herself and her background. And then Cathy, you can just jump right into the presentation. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kai, and I'm so excited to do tonight's webinar as well. If I had some of the information that I have now when my girls were younger, I think it might have changed the entire trajectory of their education. So, you did a great job introducing me. Right now, I am working for New Jersey Early Intervention System. I'm on the target evaluation team. Data is just something that I've always understood really well. And then once I saw that it started impacting my own children, that's where I really I felt like I had to, I'm sorry, there's some background noise. Okay, sorry about that. So once it started impacting my own children, that's where I just kind of moved full speed ahead with everything. My girls are now in 7th grade, but I'm going to kind of take you through our journey. So the goals for tonight is I'm going to talk to you about our story. Our story is not unique. It happens across towns, across districts, across schools. So if you understand some of the hurdles that we encountered, it's my hopes that you can learn from what happened to us and then better advocate for your own children. I'm going to talk to you about the literacy crisis that's happening in New Jersey. I understand literacy best. I understand data well. Tonight's webinar is about progress monitoring. You're going to hear me talk a lot about literacy, but nearly everything that I say can be translated to math or any other subject that you're concerned about. It's my hopes that I'm going to help you understand what effective progress monitoring should look like. And also, that way you'll know what data to ask for. So you can see here in this pictorial that I have, if you can ensure effective progress monitoring for your children, that'll allow the school to make data-driven decisions, which really would be giving your child the best outcome for success. So the literacy crisis in New Jersey, why do I say there's a literacy crisis? Well, I look at the statistics. 95% of children have the capability to read on grade level. But in 2024, 48% of students are scoring below proficient on the NJSLA. When kids struggle to read, it limits opportunities later in life. It also leads to anxiety and depression from embarrassment when they can't read. Now, the good news is there was some new legislation that was signed last August by Governor Murphy. That bill had several parts. The first part was that beginning this September, it's mandated in all schools in New Jersey that students from kindergarten through 3rd grade are screened for dyslexia twice a year. Another part to that bill was that he formed a working group. And that working group was tasked with creating recommendations for better literacy instruction for schools. And that group actually, their recommendations just came out. So I believe Kai has the link. She's going to put it in the chat for me. That way you can look through it at your own leisure. It's an extensive document, but essentially what it says is that phonics should be taught systematically and explicitly when kids are first being taught to read. And what I mean by that is that they should be taught the sounds in a predetermined order, and the sound should be taught to mastery. And the only way that you're going to do that successfully is that your teacher needs to have data on all the sounds that all the students know. And then this way, you'll know which students are keeping up with the class, and then which ones are falling behind and which ones are going to need more support. What's happening in a lot of schools, instead of that explicit systematic instruction, is a lot of schools have gotten the message that, yes, we need to do phonics. Maybe they're trickling it in here and there. Maybe they're doing it as it comes up when the student gets stuck on a word. But if it's not truly systematic and explicit, it's just not enough. What we know is that 60% of students need that systematic and explicit instruction in order to learn how to read. Even worse, what's happening in a lot of districts is that students are being asked to memorize hard words, or if they get stuck on a word, they're told to look at the picture to try to make a guess and figure it out. So what we know about how kids learn how to read, those are actually strategies used by poor readers. So if your students learning those strategies, they're learning strategies learned by poor readers, opposed to phonics, which is something that even adult proficient readers, when we're reading, we know through eye tracking studies that we're actually looking at each individual letter. So really, truly, kids need to learn through phonics. Now, our story began in kindergarten. Both of my girls did not know their letter names or their letter sounds. The teacher had spoken to me about concerns pretty early in the school year. She offered me a boot camp. The boot camp was going to be 5 days a week. They were going to be pulled out of class, and she had told me that's what I needed to do to help my daughters catch up. So I had a lot of questions. I wanted to know what curriculum they were using. I wanted to know how they were collecting the data. I also wanted to know what specific skills they were working on. And really, truly, they couldn't answer any of the questions. So I wound up declining the program because I just didn't see a point of pulling them out of class every single day if nobody could tell me what they were working on. So the year continued, and not much had changed. The teacher and I had ongoing conversations. Her concerns remained the same. My daughters continued to kind of lag behind most of the class. So by the end of the year, when I was out of other options, I requested a full evaluation from the child study team, just to try to get more information as to what's going on. So the team denied my request, but we did go to mediation, and through mediation, we were able to come to an agreement. They did agree to evaluate both of my daughters. The result of the evaluation, they had average scores on all tests and all subtests. They both passed their dyslexia screening. So the outcome of that evaluation was that there were no services warranted, despite the ongoing teacher concern. And you can see here in this pictorial exactly what I just said. The fact that their test scores said one thing totally outweighed the fact that everybody knew that they had spent an entire year struggling to read. So first grade, second grade, kind of the same story throughout. I did request a second child study team evaluation just for one of my daughters this time, because not only was she having trouble reading, but now writing was an issue as well. Once I requested, I was denied once again. We went to mediation again, but then this time it was not successful. But through a follow-up conversation that I had with my director of special education, they did ultimately agree to provide occupational therapy through a 504 plan, but still wouldn't give me any reading support. So for us, COVID hit the end of second grade. Most of third grade was virtual. And I don't necessarily blame anybody for anything that happened during that time. I think everybody was doing the best that they could with a situation where there were a whole lot of unknowns. But that doesn't change the fact that now they were in fourth grade. They were both presenting with some serious red flags. Schools were open full time. And I had noticed when I was reading with my daughter at night, she was doing a lot of guessing at the words. And then even worse than that, a lot of times the letter sounds that she would try to say just didn't even make sense. I spoke to the teacher about my concerns, and I kind of felt like I was brushed off. So I wound up escalating my concerns. Finally, when I spoke to the principal, the advice that he was able to give me was that she had to practice cause and effect and character traits, which made no sense to me at the time. Because here I am trying to tell him that my fourth grader can't read the words on the page, and he's talking to me about character traits. How in the world was she going to do that if she literally couldn't read the words on the page? So I wound up seeking supports outside of the school. And the outcome of that was that by the end of fourth grade, they both had a diagnosis of dyslexia. And then that's where I began scratching my head. How in the world did that happen? We had been having the same conversation for almost 5 years, but somehow everybody missed it. So you can see here in the chart kind of the steps that I outlined on how we got there. My daughters were screened. That's the STAR is what we do for benchmark testing in my district. So they were screened. They were both flagged for risk at different points in time. There was no follow-up. They did offer an intervention, which was that boot camp, but there was no curriculum and no data associated with it. They also didn't offer progress monitoring. So ultimately, any gains that they were making wound up being misread. Now, what's the difference between screening and progress monitoring? So screening is meant to identify students at risk. My district used STAR at the time, Dibbles, Linkit, or others that you may encounter, but there are many others as well. Progress monitoring is meant to be taken weekly, and it's meant to assess the effectiveness of an intervention. The problem is that many districts confuse the two. So what I did is I broke it down even more in a chart. If you look at this chart here, screening, the purpose of screening, exactly like I said, is to identify students at risk for poor learning outcomes. Progress monitoring is meant to track progress in a specific skill once you're already in intervention. The frequency for both is also different. Screenings, if it's done periodically, that's perfectly fine. Most schools do their benchmark testing 3 times a year. That's sufficient for a screening. Progress monitoring needs to be done frequently. Now, what you're going to do with the data for each is also different. For screening, and this is an important one, just because you are flagged at risk for a screening does not necessarily mean you need intervention. It certainly doesn't tell you which type of intervention you need. All it tells you is that you need further investigation. Data used for progress monitoring, think about that almost like your quality assurance. It's going to tell you how well the intervention is working. So if your data looks good, that's the best possible outcome. You're going to continue doing exactly what you're doing. Your intervention is effective. If the data does not look good, it should start alerting people to make adjustments in order to find a different way to help the student. So in the example of my kids, yes, they were screened. Yes, they showed risk, but no, there was no diagnostic follow-up. And that's where I ran into that frustrating conversation with my principal because nobody really understood what was happening with my daughters. And then progress monitoring, there was no weekly data collected, which did not allow for any targeted intervention. Now, why was dyslexia missed? Multiple reasons. First of all, there was no diagnostic or that skill-specific testing after the STAR, which was the benchmarking, to identify what deficits they both were showing. There was also a lack of progress monitoring to track the effectiveness of the intervention. And then the tools were misused. The STAR was used as a progress monitoring tool when it really should have been a screening. So you can see here on this chart exactly what I just said. Screening, for me, led to no diagnostic testing, which prevented any sort of targeted intervention. So what's the cost of delay? You can see here on this graph that I made, on the y-axis, these are percentiles for my daughter's score on the STAR. And then on the x, I look at her over time. So I start from kindergarten and I move to 3rd grade. Now this line here, this is the 50th percentile. This is where minimally you should be expecting your child to be. And then what I did was I really just tracked her percentiles on the STAR over time. What was misleading to everybody at the time is that she did make some substantial gains, right? So you can see she made a big jump up here. Over here, she made a big jump. There's another big jump up here. So if you're not looking at data in the way that I have it presented, it's really easy to see those jumps and say, oh, great, she's making progress. But the reality is that she was continuing to increase the gap between her and her peers, and nobody saw it. So dyslexia is identifiable with 92% accuracy by the end of first grade. Had they seen this chart much earlier, I do believe that we would have had an earlier diagnosis. And this chart explains the Matthew effect. What the Matthew effect is, it's a biblical reference, and it states the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, right? So in the case of my daughter, she was stuck trying to figure out what the words were saying, where the rest of her class, who had already had those skills, were building on more and more complex skills. And that's exactly how you can see the widening gap of the achievement gap happen. So, and that's also why they say it takes 4 times as many resources to help a 4th grader that's struggling to read compared with a struggling 1st grader. There's research that shows that kids not reading by the end of 1st grade are unlikely to ever catch up. And delayed intervention will almost always widen the achievement gap. And that's exactly what happened in the case of my daughter. So the problem with current practices, districts often view any gains as progress, and then widening gaps are ignored. Another problem is when there is no diagnostic, that's specific skill testing, which does not give you any baseline for an intervention. And then lastly, the lack of frequent progress monitoring prevents you from making any intervention changes that you may need to make. So you can see here exactly what I've been saying is while we were celebrating those small gains on the star, what actually was happening is that we missed the growing gap from my daughter to her peers. I believe all of that could have been prevented had my school had an effective MTSS or NJTSS system. Now, what that is, MTSS stands for the multi-tiered system of support. That's a system, it's a framework used throughout the country. New Jersey has its own version. It's called the New Jersey tiered system of support. The two are nearly identical. So a lot of times you'll see people use the terms interchangeably. It's a framework used to identify what supports are needed. And then if you look at this picture here, this came directly from the Department of Education. And then Kai has the link for that. So she's going to drop it in the chat for me. If you go and if you look at that link, there's a lot of tabs. There's a lot of information on that link. One of the tabs has a guidebook. And I encourage you to go through that guidebook because that guidebook is really easy to read and gives you a lot of detail about how an effective MTSS system should be implemented in your school. But in summary, what it says is your tier 1 intervention is the base of this triangle in the dark blue. It's your universal supports. It's your general classroom education. It's things that the teacher is doing every single day for the class as a whole. It also counts if the teacher happens to notice that maybe there's several students missing a particular concept and she wants to spend more time on it or teach it in a different way. If it's instruction the entire class is getting, it counts as tier 1. Now, for those kids who are not able to keep up with the regular tier 1 instruction, that's where you have your tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. Tier 2, up here in this light blue, is it's targeted intervention, targeted at a specific skill. That's why they call it targeted. It's in small groups, and it's designed to catch students up at an accelerated rate. And then by the time you get to tier 3, all the way at the top of the triangle, it's really just more individualized and more intensive interventions for kids who need that level of support. Some misconceptions about NJTSS. Well, the first one is that it could provide support to students in general education and special education. Many people incorrectly assume, well, that's only for kids in general education, and that's not the purpose of it. It's meant to give kids a seamless way to transition between all levels of support, depending on what skill the teacher is working on. And you can move in and out of the different skills regardless of, or the different tiers, I should say, regardless of which level, if you have an IEP or not. Another one that you may see a lot, it cannot be used as a reason to delay a referral to the child study team. A lot of times you'll hear districts say things like, okay, let's try a tier 2 intervention before we put in the referral to see if you really need it. It's not about, we're going to try this for 6 weeks and see how your child does. It's not about waiting for your child to fail. The purpose of it is to give students support as soon as you see that they need it And there's no reason why you can't simultaneously make a referral to the child study team while doing a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention, or have your child with an IEP benefit from a tier 3 intervention. And then the last misconception is that tier 2 and tier 3 should be done in addition to, not instead of tier 1. Everybody gets tier 1 instruction. If you need that extra dosage of support, that's where tier 2 and tier 3 come from. If you're getting pulled out of your tier 1 instruction, you're no longer getting that additional dose. So how exactly do you measure growth? The first thing you're going to do is plot a goal line. So you can see here in this chart, what they're doing is that they're looking at words correct per minute. So the goal line would be this purple line up here. And it's really your baseline is the first thing that you're going to plot. So right here, you see she's doing 5 words per minute. That's your baseline. And then the next question that you need to ask is, where do you expect her to be at the end of intervention? Well, in the case of this example, that's all the way up here at 25 words per minute. And then you simply just connect the dots. You're going to connect your baseline to where you expect your child to be at the end. And this is the goal. And then now that your child's receiving intervention on a weekly basis, you're plotting where they are. And you're looking at a specific skill, right? Again, we're looking at words per minute. We're not looking at reading as a whole. So week by week, you're plotting your data points exactly where your child is. And you can see this first half is for that tier 1 intervention. That red line, which is where the child is moving further away from that goal line. So that's where you can see she's not really making progress. But then at this point in time, they moved her to tier 2 instruction. And you can see now she's approaching that goal line. That now shows you that the intervention is effective. So important questions to ask your school. First of all, you want to know what skills are being targeted. You want to know what the baseline data is for each targeted skill. You want to know what curriculum that they're using, and you want to know if it's evidence-based. You also want to know how they'll be collecting their data, how often they're collecting data, and it's important for them to be able to tell you where they expect your child to be at the end of the intervention period. Then I had skipped a slide back here. So solutions and advocacy, right? So some things that is important to do for your child. First of all, you want to ensure diagnostic testing after screening to flag any risks. You also want to make sure that that weekly progress monitoring is happening with data that's specific to the skills that they're working on in intervention. Make sure you're advocating for evidence-based interventions, and then always make sure you're using that MTSS framework to make sure they're getting appropriate tiered supports. And I have all of that summarized in this chart here. Essentially, this is your diagnostic testing, progress monitoring, evidence-based interventions, and all of that is happening under the MTSS or NJTSS framework. Okay, so call to action. Some things you can do as a parent to make real differences for your child. First of all, you want to make sure those literacy screenings are being performed 2 times per year. And you want to make sure that you're getting the results and somebody's explaining it to you in a way that's easy for you to understand. If your child happens to be flagged on any sort of screening, make sure that there's that follow-up diagnostic testing. So this way you know exactly where your child needs the support. Make sure the intervention is evidence-based. And then you have that NJTSS framework to make sure you're getting those appropriate tiered supports. You want progress monitoring with that skill-specific data. Educate other parents, right? So either share this webinar with them, talk to them about things that you've learned or through your experiences. Supporting New Jersey's literacy bills is also an important one. I think New Jersey has made some steps forward in the right direction. I think we have much further to go, and the more support that these bills are able to get, I think we're just going to see better and better outcomes. Share your story in the same way that I am, because like I said, I know that we all have different versions of the same story. So by finding those commonalities, we can learn from each other on how to better advocate for our own kids. So really, that's everything that I had prepared for tonight. I hope that it was helpful. Thank you everybody so much for your time and for attending. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but at this time, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Cathy. That was, I mean, if I had had that, if I had had this 5 years ago, the entire trajectory would be different.
I mean, me too.
Right? So you said it as
Yes.
well. So many questions. I'm just going to go through what has been asked and then we'll see, where we go from here because my head is spinning now with questions because of your graphs. I need to start doing all of this. I mean, we all do. So can you speak to how this is from, earlier in the presentation, a child's social and emotional development may be impacted when they are struggling to advance through curriculum, and especially when they begin to rely heavily on memorization as a form of compensation, and how does this follow them and affect them long term?
I mean, if you're talking in the world of reading, the statistics are there. And I'm sure it generalizes to other areas, but like I said before, reading is just what I know best. I don't know the numbers offhand, but like I had said earlier in the presentation, when kids struggle to read, there's real data out there about increasing anxiety, increasing development, which of course is going to affect them socially, emotional. There's stories out there. You hear people talking about real trauma that they've experienced because they really just thought that they weren't smart enough. And then they find out years later that they had a learning disability and nobody took the time to really understand how they learned so that this way they could be more successful.
That's a great answer. And, I think we've all lived those devastating outcomes of just not identifying it early on. So it's why we were so excited for this video. It's going to give parents the tools and resources to be able to chart progress and really understand where they're at and if they're struggling, how to advocate effectively. Next question. Please mention what kind of data should be taken. In many cases, parents don't know what the correct type of screening is necessary, and it's not readily available from schools and given to parents. So, really, what's the school's responsibility? What's the parent's responsibility? And how do we get this information? And, how do we learn what to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, the screening is really your benchmark testing that they should be providing. I mean, it's certainly your right to have all of the data from the benchmark testing. If not, I mean, I ask questions. If I don't get the answers I like, I just keep escalating. That's one way to do it. If you're talking about rating, this new literacy bill specifically says that the results must be shared with parents if your child is flagged for at risk. But I mean, knowing that it exists, knowing that your district has to be doing benchmarking testing. I think most districts do it 3 times a year. Minimally, they should be doing twice a year. But just knowing that it's there and having somebody explain it to you in a way that makes sense is really their obligation.
Are you talking MAP testing or what kind of benchmark testings?
So yeah, MAP, or like I had talked about the Linkit, a STAR, DIBBLES, those are all different examples of different benchmark testing that schools will do. There's more than that. Every school kind of has their own version, but those are the common ones that I know of.
And I haven't even heard of 3 of those, so that's wild.
Well, because your school does MAP, so likely you know what your school does.
Okay, so it's one or the other.
Yeah. And I mean, some are better than others. You don't really have any control over what your district is using. DIBBLES is for reading. DIBBLES is the best that I know of. DIBBLES is now called Acadian. So if you're hearing those words, well, that's great news for you. But regardless, it's getting that information from the benchmarking. If you ask your teacher about benchmarking testing and where's my child with benchmarking, they have to have an answer for you.
Okay. And should these graphs, those beautiful graphs that you showed that, put 100 questions into one picture, is this the responsibility of the parents or the schools?
I mean, it's the school's responsibility. New Jersey doesn't mandate anything. So at the end of the day, you can't make them do it. But my point in showing it to you is because I know that there are districts that do it and use it, and they do it effectively. So it is possible to be done. The best that you can do is advocate for it. If you're not seeing it done, that's where I had gone through, ask them those questions, kind of put the pressure on.
So you could ask your district to start graphing progress.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask them how they're going to be doing progress monitoring, right? And depending on your answer, if you feel like it's not a sufficient answer, your follow-up question could be, well, how do you know if they're going to be making gains compared to their peers?
Right, because a lot of times, even if you read the goals in the IEPs, there's a lot of, subjective things happening there. And so when we say data-driven, it is literally a dot on a graph that we can connect based on real data.
Yeah, and I mean, if you've got the wherewithal to do it, there's no reason why you can't graph it yourself. I mean, you really shouldn't have to sit at home and graph your own child's data. But I mean, if you need to, go for it.
If you need to, I love that answer, right? Because it's how we take a part in, really directing their education to a very large degree.
Yeah.
All right, next question. How do you ask for the data when you know the staff is not taking any data whatsoever, even when asked to take it? So I don't know, maybe that question was answered in that benchmark testing, because that is a requirement, or is it not a requirement to do the benchmark testing?
I'm pretty sure that the benchmarking is a requirement. The problem is that's just your screening, and that's the trouble that we had run into, right? Like, we had that initial screening. My children were flagged for risk, but nobody knew where they were struggling. You could request diagnostic testing. You can't make them do anything, unfortunately. But I mean, just by continuing to ask the right questions, I think puts pressure on them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. How do you advocate for screening after grade 3? So grade 3 and grade 4 is where we're finding a lot of issues.
Yeah, well, so that law for dyslexia screening does mandate grade 3, so they're included in that, and it does say that, I don't know exactly the words of the law, but it does have something in there that says that if your child's struggling, you're able to request the screening even if they're past grade 3.
That you're able to request it.
Yeah, and there's some sort of language in that law that says for students that are struggling past grade 3.
Okay. Next question. Who conducts diagnostic testing after a screening? And that's a great question, because that we've got to understand, how this transpires once, screening has been done and it's showing that there may be something happening. There has to be a next step. Does the school handle it, or is it a private provider? Who is the best professional to diagnose reading difficulties?
Well, so that diagnostic testing, the term's misleading. Diagnostic testing does not mean diagnosis. Diagnostic testing, in this sense, what it means is that you're screened. So in the case of my daughters, they were screened. We didn't use MAP, we used STAR. They were flagged for a risk. It had a diagnostic test been done, it would have been a more in-depth test in reading to look at all the individual components to find out exactly what's happening. And that is something the school should be doing. Again, it's not mandated. You can't force them. You could ask for it. Now, once your child has persistent struggles in school, or if you suspect that there's some sort of something bigger going on, then yeah, you can always go for the private testing and for that diagnosis, but don't get the two terms confused.
So, right. So diagnostic is in the school. A diagnosis would be in the school, outside of the school.
Yeah, I mean, most times schools won't diagnose. They can, but they just don't. So 9 out of 10 times the diagnosis is going to be outside the school.
Next question. How does a teacher determine when a student should move from tier 1 to tier 2, or from tier 2 to tier 3 within one of the multi-tiered support systems? And at what point in that process would parents be notified or involved in those decisions?
Every school is different. I wish that there were universal rules. But schools have their own criteria. I mean, sometimes it's not always transparent to the parents asking enough questions, right? Like if you see that you have your child in tier 2 and they're not making the progress, well, then yeah, you could request that they move to tier 3, or I mean, vice versa. And I mean, it's a lot of times in a lot of districts, you'll see. I mean, I've heard the term tier 2 health. You're just stuck in tier 2 forever. That's really not how it's supposed to be working. Depending on the skills that the class is learning at the time, you could be jumping from tier 1, tier 2 to tier 3, depending on what level of support you need with that particular school. It is something, again, I've seen done in districts, not very often. That is how the system's intended for.
But without that data-driven monitoring, it would be pretty hard to figure out, how to advance or not through that system.
I mean, what I say a lot of times is, okay, so we're going to do tier 2 for 6 weeks. We're going to see if we're successful. I don't even know how they're defining that a lot of times. And that either the intervention's over or you're moved to tier 3, but that's not the intention of the system at all. There shouldn't be a certain number of weeks tied to it. It's more about, are you keeping up with the general classroom instruction? Are you not? And then what level of support do you need? And then that, yeah, I mean, Kai, you said it too. It's that data-driven decisions. And I think that's the most important thing to remember. If you have the data, it allows you to make better decisions for your child. Otherwise, you're just guessing.
Right, because we see at home, a lot of what schools don't see, where, they may be breaking down at home because they're so frustrated and, the grades they're getting it's just, there's a big discrepancy between what you see them doing at home and what you're working with them through. So
yeah, and that's where that anxiety and depression. Yeah, and that's where that anxiety and depression piece comes in too.
100%. Next question. What issues can you spot in MAP testing? So, right, if your child is struggling, what information does MAP testing provide, and would it identify a learning disability?
No, and that's it doesn't, and it only flags you for being at risk for future learning outcomes, and that's all it'll tell you, which is why that follow-up diagnostic testing is so important, right? Like I know MAP does have those different categories for reading or for math, but it's really not designed to give you that level of detailed information you need. Once your child's flagged, you should be talking to the school about you want further testing in whatever area it is, so that way you know exactly where they're struggling.
Very important. Because right, you get the test back and you're like, wow, that's really low, but so what does that mean?
Exactly.
It could be so many different things, So what happens if you've asked for the benchmarking and the school is not providing it? What's your next step?
I wanted to
Somebody's asking it. Might have happened.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's had, that's why I stopped myself. I'm sure it's happened. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're entitled to all of your child's data. They may not have to show you the exact test, but I mean, I would just keep escalating your concerns if you're in that position, right? Ask the teacher, ask the principal. I've gone to my superintendent before, but I mean, that's part of your child's record. It's your right to have it.
And that's a good answer. Keep escalating, show up at your board meeting, ask the board members, I've requested this and I haven't gotten it back. And then if that still doesn't work, you come find our private group, NJIE 504 Navigators, and you ask, and we will help.
That is true.
So there's always that resource. Okay, next question. I've been told that one-to-one personal testing during elementary school and electronic testing evaluation for middle school. How can you advocate for that change back to one-to-one testing if the gap is so large and electronic testing isn't effective?
So the electronic testing, a lot of times you'll see for the screenings. And that's why screenings really just don't give you a lot of information. A screening is designed to be quick and dirty. That's what I learned when I was in school. That's exactly how they told us. Because you have to screen the entire school. So you're not going to have the resources to spend that time with everybody. So the computer adapted tests, even though they're not ideal, no screening is ideal. But again, once you're flagged and you have that diagnostic testing, that's where that one-to-one testing comes, it becomes much more relevant and much more important, because that's where you're getting to find out exactly what those specific deficits are.
Yeah, and that's important to understand the specific deficits so that we can put in supports and goals and really start to, understand where the struggle is and why. So Rose Allen makes a comment, and Rose, I'm probably going to ask you to do our webinar on independent education evaluations, because there is a strategy, to request an IEE, even before a child has been evaluated. It could, because it really triggers a district to evaluate. So that's a whole nother topic that we really need to dive into, because, we are meeting a lot of resistance with districts not really wanting to evaluate.
Yeah.
It's a push to even get them to evaluate. So it's possible. I mean, you absolutely can get there, with a few emails, but any strategy that we can learn will be valuable. Next question. How crucial are SMART goals in an IEP for effective progress monitoring? And then, just so everyone knows, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound.
I mean, they're crucial. I spend hours and days and weeks with my district rewriting goals so that there are SMART goals. If everything is going to hinge from the goal, and if you don't have, you said it right in the question, if you don't have a measurable goal, then how do you know what you're measuring, really? And then how do you do progress monitoring? So, I mean, I demand SMART goals from my district all the time.
Where would
and it's in the code. It's in the code that goals have to be SMART.
Where would you go? So, like, let's say you get your IEP and you're looking at your goals and you're saying, are these SMART goals? And if they, like, how, number one, would you know if they were SMART goals or not? And then number two, how would you effectively advocate for the goals that you need to see with the child study team?
I mean, it's exactly that, right? Like, we could talk about SMART all the time or all day long, but I mean, what my idea of a SMART goal is may be different than yours. And I mean, things can be measurable to different degrees. But I mean, when it comes down to it, I think you have to know what you're measuring. And I mean, I would hope that most districts would work with you, at least to that extent, to make sure that you understand the skill that you're measuring.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to arrive there. I kind of want to put that out there. That's a process in and of itself, when you get that IEP and you're reading through everything and you're trying to figure out how you build this roadmap, so that it's effective.
Yeah, and I mean, I said it too. I spend a long time with my district on goals. I think I spend more time on goals than anything else, and we just go back and forth.
So if you're looking at that IEP, you are really zeroed in on goals.
Yeah, because I mean, that is going to be your basis for everything that happens.
And if you don't really know what goals you're looking for, that's where we sometimes struggle so much. And that's why, it's so important to have groups of experienced parents, come and ask questions about goals. And then, learn from parents who have been down that road before, because we can't always go out and hire an advocate to help us understand, or pay for knowledge or spend, hours, days, weeks, months, years trying to understand what we're looking at, because a lot of times it's a foreign language.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have a background in education. So it's hard to find support.
I mean, that's where your group is so great, Kai.
I hope so. It's definitely, it's not my group, it's our group. I mean, it really is, because when I don't know half of the things you guys are helping with. There's so many experts at so many different things willing to support and provide a resource for families. So it's so crucial though, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah, it
have to
really
be able
is.
to ask these questions. Okay, let's get through the rest of the questions because we want to keep this to an hour. And now I've lost my place. Have a friend or family familiar with data as part of your, yeah. Rose says, have a friend or family familiar with data as part of your team. That would be wonderful if we all had that.
I do have a friend that comes to me all the time with her child's IEP.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
with your background, right?
No, my friend comes to me for her child's IEP.
Oh, for her. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're in high demand. Yeah, and that's a great answer. And if we all had that person, things would run a lot more smoothly. A great book to understand medical and educational terminology is Disconnected Kids by Robert Melillo. Melillo. All right, well, thank you for sharing that. We will look into that. Okay, next question. Should the data reflect the general education curriculum, or are the IEPs modified curriculum that are not, I can't even see because this thing is in the way, that are not based on grade level? Should testing be done on lower grade curriculum to see data improvements? Did you understand that?
I do, because it's a question that comes up a lot. And
Wow.
the answer that I see, well, because I think what the question is saying, let's say you have a fifth grader who is functioning at a second grade reading level. Are you now testing that fifth grader on second grade work, or are you testing your fifth grader on fifth grade work? And the answer that I see most often, so I think it's the right answer, is that benchmarking always needs to be done at grade level. So in that example that I just provided, that benchmarking, that screening needs to be done on grade level, but then the progress monitoring is at the level that you're working at, right? Because if you're working on second grade text, if you're working on, I don't know, second grade math fluency, that's where you want to be progress monitoring, and that data could be for the second grade curriculum.
Okay, so that's actually such an important distinction to make is when you are charting your data, that should be on grade level because we need to see, what, how, where we're at and
Yeah,
how
that was a
far
great.
behind we are. But
Yeah,
then
that
when
was a
it
great
comes
question.
to catching up, those are your goals. So
Yeah,
you have to start where you're at.
yeah, yeah. That was a
Okay,
great question.
that's a great question. Yeah. So on grade level, if you're mapping it out, and honestly, I just met a family and it was it just so happens that after evaluations, which they didn't want to do for whatever reason, seventh grader is on a first grade reading level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see it.
So this is a reality.
Yeah,
And it's not uncommon.
yeah,
And families and parents really tend to beat themselves up when they get this information and blame themselves. And that's tough. That's a tough weight to carry because now you have limited number of years left and you've got a huge gap to close.
right, right. But
So,
I mean, as your parent, as a parent, yes, we're all there here to advocate for our kids. It wasn't necessarily your place to notice when your child was struggling.
and that's so true though, right? We really, I
Yeah,
think, rely so heavily on processes and all of the teachers being able to let us know if something is not progressing. But a lot of times, and especially in the past couple of years, just because with all of the pandemic and everything we've been through, so much kind of halted and got lost and kids were just slipping through the crack left and right. And I think we're in that like fallout phase now, learning just, how many and how drastic it was. And we're trying to close the gaps for a lot of kids in the same, window of time.
yeah,
So it's a lot on everybody, including our teachers who have a lot of kids in the classroom with a lot of diverse needs. So we've got to figure out how to work together. And I think that data driven information is so helpful.
so
So
huge.
I'm
Yeah,
going to be printing all of my tests and making my own chart. I Promise you. I just wish I knew this, so long ago. All right, let's see here. Should data reflect the general, oh, nope, I did that one. So many teachers put generic goals based on electronic suggestions. They've actually copied and pasted the other kids' names in these IEPs in the goals section.
I've seen it in my own IEPs.
Yeah.
It happens.
So, we have to read them. We have to read them. That's the way we can take part in this. And if they put generic goals, we have to advocate effectively. That's the best answer I can give. I don't know if you have a different answer for that, but
I think, no, you said it perfectly. I can't say any more than, yeah.
We're the line of defense, right? We're the accountability measure. It's up to us to make sure that things are going as they should be going. It really is to a large degree, because when they don't, we're the only ones accountable, right? Mm-hmm. School's going to end. So we have a finite number of years. So I think we do have to take a lot of that responsibility on ourselves and just understand that we have to learn. We also have to learn.
Exactly.
All right, Rosanna's hand raised when we had. Okay, so we will, Deanna, let me just do what we could use the last 10 minutes for that. NJ ARC does free IEP help on Thursdays with Adara.
Oh, that's cool.
NJ ARC, I've heard a lot about them. I actually need to look in more detail to understand what resources they provide, because that name keeps coming up. How do we get state recommendations turned into mandated?
I mean, help us advocate. I know a lot of the people who have been doing the work to advocate. New Jersey is a local control state. So, and I've been told more so than most of the other states in the country. And what that means is at the state level, they want the individual districts to be able to have power to decide what they want. So I think that's why things do not get mandated in New Jersey. It's something that there's a lot of people that continuously advocate for. That literacy bill specifically, I mean, it was a great bill. It had a lot of positive things put in it. It did not have nearly as much as what the original version had. And it all stems back to New Jersey wanting that local control.
And it's like a double-edged sword, right? Because it sounds great in theory, but if there's no standard measure of accountability or compliance, you're kind of hostage to where you're at, and it may not be, working out so well.
And I've been there. I've handed my district recommendations before, and I've been told, well, that's only a recommendation. We don't have to listen. And I mean, at the end of the day, they're right.
At the end of the day, they're right. So if something is not going well, we need to have data-driven information.
Well, right, because the law does say that instruction needs to be evidence-based, and the law does speak to progress monitoring. So you do have that to fall back on. They just don't tell you how to do it.
They don't tell you how to do it. That's it.
Yeah.
So we're all, of course, it sounds great in theory, and then in practice, it's quite an undertaking.
Yeah.
To actually organize and then stay vigilant for a year, and then the next year, and for however long it takes.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. Deanna, you wanted to give Rose a chance to ask a question because her hand is raised. Can you figure out that on the back end? Because I don't really know how to find or unmute. I don't even see the hand raised, to be honest with you.
This is Rose. I'd taken my hand down after you went ahead.
There, you found out how to unmute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
No, go ahead. If you had a question to ask or a comment to make or information, to add on to Cathy's presentation, feel free. We have 6 minutes left.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak on building your team as a parent. And I know it sounds hard, but in order for progress monitoring especially, it doesn't have to be someone who understands education. It needs to be someone that understands data. And
Yeah.
believe it or not, you have a lot of people in your community and family that understands progress monitoring from a data perspective, like Excel spreadsheets. So anybody who's familiar with Excel and progress monitoring, I mean, creating charts, could be your data expert. So I'm just giving you another way to look at it outside of the world of education to get someone to become your data expert. They don't have to be an education expert to do progress monitoring.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I'm a statistician by trade.
That's why you. That's why
So
you.
I love progress monitoring, and I
Yeah.
do this for my nieces and nephews. And
Yeah.
so as an aunt, you don't have to pay me. I'm gonna follow the children forever, and I love data. But it's also your accountant, and it's also anybody who likes data, and they will love to come because they love data and they love you and they love the child. So those are only requirements you have to have for your data analyst.
Yeah, I mean, businesses have quality assurance. So why don't we have it in education? But I mean, really, your progress monitoring is your quality assurance. So, but anybody who does that in the business world, I would imagine, would be capable to do it to help you with your IEP too.
And to that's a great point, though. We need progress monitors in our schools, and on these teams even. So like somebody like Rose could, get paid to do this work because Rose, you're in our group and you've been hugely supportive of questions, and now everybody knows where to find you.
I think we need Rose inside
Progress
our
monitoring.
organization, Kai.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because a lot of us can chart. It's just organizing all that information, asking for it all, organizing it all, and then taking the time to do it. But, as you say, we care. We don't have another choice. We have to do this because that is the data and the evidence and the facts that we are going to need. Otherwise, we can't effectively advocate. And then I did want to ask just one question because it's so hard to progress monitor social emotional stuff. So we are seeing these increases in academics and they're relying on this to say that everything's okay, no more supports, and the environment's appropriate. How do we progress monitor social emotional, or is that a different webinar for a different day?
I mean, I guess it would have to depend on the child. That's like a really big question, right? Because I mean, social emotional it manifests itself in so many ways. Maybe at home, like you said before, that's where the behaviors come out. Maybe it's the child acting out in school to get out of class. It's more difficult, I believe, with social emotional, but it's a matter of finding the right construct to measure it on.
Yeah, and we probably just have to figure that one out because there isn't a data point. I don't know unless we keep some kind of log or.
I mean, yeah, but you could track how often you see a particular behavior happening over time. However your child's going to express that social emotional piece. But that's where I say it's just so different on how it's going to be expressed across different children.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I feel like we need a webinar on social emotional progress as well. Yeah. All right, we are at 2 minutes. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. We really tried very hard to keep it at 1 hour to respect everybody's time. This will live on our website for the rest of eternity. So if you know anyone who needs information on progress monitoring, please send them to njlearners.org. And it is under the webinars and event page. With that, Cathy, thank you so much. This was hugely valuable. I'm going to go back and watch it myself and get all of my tests in order, start my own graph, because I think that will help me in my advocacy. We all can learn a lot from each and every one of us. So thank you for being here tonight. And we'll see you in the group. Everybody, if you don't know, NJIEP 504 Navigators on Facebook. First conversation of its kind. If you need support, resources, anything, come find us. And with that, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.